So you're live now. Sorry, I just got an error and had to check. You are live. You are live.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Are you about to start? Thanks very much. My name is Peter Murphy. I'm from the Politics and the Pub Committee. I want to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land we're on today. That's the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I pay my respects to their elders past and present. I know we're building up to the referendum, and there's much more focus in the public debate about Aboriginal people and their demands, calls, interests, and grievances. So one of the session we're going to have in September will be focused on the yes in the referendum with two really powerful speakers. So I hope we can keep on building up a momentum for that. So today's topic is shifting energy policy rapidly to renewables, the prospects after the state election. So the climate catastrophe is bearing down on New South Wales, on Australia and the world. More action is coming from the federal Labor government elected 12 months ago, including a national net zero authority to manage what we would hope is a just transition. And now we have the New South Wales Labor government, and he inherits the plan from the previous Liberal Environment Minister and Treasurer, Matt Keane, for renewable energy zones in New South Wales. The question for today is, what do these new political circumstances enable in terms of more rapid transition to renewables? So we have two very capable speakers here to unpack this topic. First is Ms. Janine Kitson. She's a retired teacher now, a New South Wales Teachers Federation activist, and more recently, an independent environmental candidate in the Liberal seats of Bradfield and Davidson, respectively federal and state. Janine is one of the initiators of the Electrifying Bradfield campaign, a practical community-led push to convert that electorate to renewable energy. In recent years, she helped lead the campaign to incorporate the Gardens of Stone features near Lithgow into a new national park, preventing their destruction by a proposed extension of the Centennial coal mine. Our second speaker is James Miranda. He's a prominent member of the New South Wales Young Labor Left. He works as a researcher in the National Office of the Electrical Trades Union. The ETU has a strong policy on renewable energy and is heavily engaged in the advisory board of the New South Wales Renewable Energy Zones. So I think he can give us a different angle into this topic. So I'd like now to introduce Janine. Each of them will speak for 20 minutes at the most, and then we'll have the question and answer. So please welcome Janine Kitson to the microphone.
Thank you, Peter. I really don't need to speak because you've actually said everything I wanted to say. Thank you. And I'd like to acknowledge that I'm meeting on the land of the Gadigal people, pay my respect to their elders past and present. I also want to acknowledge you in the audience because there are a lot of people here who have incredible depth of expertise in renewable energy, in battery, in community projects. Because I'm going to talk about my project, Electrifying Bradfield, but I know there are many other groups that are burgeoning, particularly in the inner city. So I acknowledge you and I ask you to humbly accept my story because I know you probably know a lot more than I do. I also want to acknowledge the connection that we all face with the climate emergency. And that is something that I think is really about our power of community, that we are connected, because it doesn't matter where we live, we are all impacted by profound heat waves, by wild storms, and we are all connected in that very dangerous time we are living through. So it is a really terrible time. Now, The question that has been put to me is, what are the prospects of shifting energy rapidly renewable after the New South Wales election? And of course, we are in a better place. With New South Wales Labor winning, we are in a better place. They have policy, they are showing commitment to working through the climate emergency, putting in renewables. Just one thing, and I know James will talk more about it later, like the Net Zero Commission, which will really target and use legislative power to ensure the targets that are set are going to be met. I also have to acknowledge that even though the coalition had, Liberal Party, New South Wales Coalition had many, failings, which is an understatement, they also did show leadership on climate action. And I guess that is testimony of Matt Keane, who was the Minister for Energy. And really, in the recent state election, the Mineral Council really did run a campaign against him. So we are in a better state. The incoming New South Wales Labor Party has also done some really important things about stopping climate generating infrastructure projects, such as really putting a stop on that Northern Beaches tunnel, which was just absolutely another tollway mass transport climate greenhouse disaster. As well, it has put another huge infrastructure project, which is about creating more climate greenhouse emission, with stopping the raising of the Warragamba Dam wall, which of course will protect our World Heritage Area. Importantly, it's standing up for TAFE, our vocational education. And without a strong TAFE, we will not have the skills that are needed in this transition. As Peter said, we have a federal Labor government, as we all know, but their policy settings are so much better as well. And really, hopefully, well, since that 2022 federal election, which really was a climate election, the climate wars, we hope, are now over. But of course, we can never relax. And we can never assume. And of course, we know that greenwashing is incredibly dangerous, that we have to watch out for it. We're hearing all these wonderful projects, but are they really doing the things that they set out to do? We have in New South Wales still the real risk of going, do we go down gas? We don't want to go down gas. The Pilliga, the Narrabri, should not be turned into industrial gas fields. That's the wrong way to go. And it's going to be very interesting to see if we have to fight against that. We've all got issues about forestry. Now, forestry is really important in the climate debate, because if we do not protect our native forests, we are also exacerbating greenhouse gas emissions. And forests and trees are the best carbon sinks we can have. So they are just critical, and also critical for biodiversity protection. Again, we have to be worried, because if New South Wales Labor has said it's going to stop privatisation. That is fantastic. Privatisation of our public services, which is so essential in the transition. But that virus of neoliberalism is always around, and it really is something we have to watch. We also have the context of hyper-militarization, a really democracy under really being floundered, and that particularly is seen in New South Wales with the anti-protest laws which target climate activists. And of course, globally, we haven't succeeded. We have not yet reached the state where we have reduced our carbon emissions. We have not yet reached the state where we have stopping a halt on biodiversity extinction. So for me, as someone who stood in 2 recent elections, which was really fun and I really enjoyed it, and I really basically said what we needed to do was we needed to rebuild communities and have on the ground renewable projects that would inspire local communities and transform local communities and give them the energy, renewable energy to really tackle the climate crisis. And that basically is pretty simple. Put solar on your roofs, turn every electrification in your house, heating, cooking into through electricity, and have an EV. So that's a pretty simple model of the electrification process that is really based on the work of Dr. Saul Griffith, who is talking about electrification of everything. That's really a simple, and it's not the only solution, because really we do need to get more cars off the road, and that public transport issue is really another key policy area that needs to be dealt with. In Bradfield, electrifying Bradfield represents the electorate of Bradfield, which basically goes from Chatswood to Asquith. And of course, it's a very affluent area. But really surprisingly, it has one of the lowest solar uptakes in Sydney. It is really quite disgraceful. I didn't know that when I was standing for election. I kept saying, Bradfield, you're affluent, you're educated, and you're entrepreneurial. But that's not happening, and that's why it was really good to sort of pose the question to the community that we really needed to lift our game. And that's what Electrifying Bradfield hopes to do. It's a work in process. What happened was, after the election, we incorporated as a body so that we could now apply for grants. On our committee, we've basically got people who have got strong education backgrounds. So we hope to run a series of educational programs talking about the transformation of solarizing your house. And with new technology happening pretty rapidly, we hope that this will really take off. So those are the things I wanted to talk about, but I really believe that it's really community has to be really reinvigorated with renewable projects. We can't rely on our politicians up high. It has to happen from the ground upwards. And this has to be a continuing movement. And every area has its own community ecosystem that is different, but the goal has to be towards reducing our greenhouse emissions. We have no choice. We are in a desperate situation. We have to do it rapidly, and in answering that question, we're not doing it fast enough, but it's hopefully through engaging people at a localized community level, we've got a chance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Janine. I'll now ask James Miranda if he'd like to come and make a presentation.
Hi everyone, my name is James Miranda. I'm the National Policy and Research Officer of the Electrical Trades Union. I'm also the Assistant Secretary of Australian Young Labor and an active campaigner in New South Wales Young Labor Left. So I'm really just going to sort of focus I feel like I'd be sort of preaching to the choir to come in here today and start telling you about why we need a transition. So I'll talk instead about the opportunities that are there for this new Minns government, so that you guys have the tools in a couple of years' time if they try and turn around and say, we've done everything we can to say no, well, you had these opportunities and you didn't take them, or to say, well done, you took every opportunity that you had in front of you. So there's three sort of broad categories of opportunities available. There's those that were left behind by Matt Keane and the New South Wales Electricity Infrastructure Roadmap. There's the opportunity to take advantage of federal government initiatives, and then the implementation of New South Wales Labor's election policies. So first up, the legacy of Matt Keane and the Electricity Infrastructure Roadmap. It's essentially the state government saying we need to get massive amounts of new renewable generations and storage online quickly, smoothly, and in a manner that's still profitable for the private investors they're trying to attract. So they have to make sure that there was appropriate enabling infrastructure, local supply chains for these companies to access, a skilled workforce for them to use, and a strong social license from the regional communities where this infrastructure is going. The roadmap sets out three really important structural components: the physical setting for the new renewables, the plan to make sure the investment delivers dividends to local communities, and an agency to facilitate that investment. So the physical settings, a lot of you probably know about the renewable energy zones. There's 5 of them across New South Wales. They initially announced they expected 12 gigawatts of generation and 2 gigawatts of storage. I think with the expressions of interest, they're up to about 16 gigawatts of generation now. There's also going to be loads of new network infrastructure that needs to be built for this. Not many people are aware. Our grid is built to have a few massive coal power stations constantly pumping out energy. It's not built for lots of distributed generation and generation coming from different parts of the grid at different times of day. So there's a lot of work needs doing in upgrading all of that. It's also one of the reasons why nuclear isn't really viable, because that sort of need to ramp up and ramp down as the renewable generation comes off and online, produces a lot of radon gas, which you need to leave time to dissipate because it's quite toxic and radioactive. We've got the Renewable Energy Sector Board plan. My boss, Trevor Gould, the National Policy Officer for the ETUs on the sector board, played a massive role in writing this plan. It's massive. It's probably the leading procurement sort of setting structure in Australia of all the state governments for renewables anyway. It has a merit criteria and a value for money criteria that applies to all tenders on the renewable energy zones, that sets minimum standards for local content, for hiring apprentices and learning workers, offering First Nations opportunities. So whether that's hiring First Nations people directly or contracting to First Nations owned businesses, and giving opportunities to underrepresented groups. So that's like getting women and culturally and linguistically diverse communities into these construction and STEM jobs where they're not traditionally found. So there's minimum standards for all of that if you're going to try and build something on the reses. There's also stretch goals, which are long-term goals to signal to the market, hey, don't just meet the bare minimum because we're going to be increasing these soon. So that's a massive opportunity for the Minns government. There's a requirement to periodically review those standards and increase them as the capacity for the economy to meet them grows. So there's a real chance for them. I think there'll be a review next year to take a much more aggressive stance and sort of pursue distributing the benefits of renewables in New South Wales much more broadly. And then finally, Energy Code. Their role is to plan the build out of the reses, and they plan that all centrally. They do the early stages of the network infrastructure planning, and they also manage community contribution funds. So normally with these sorts of projects, you'd have a company go in, they do their job, and then they say, oh, we'll rebuild a tiny little town hall that no one uses, and that's us giving back to the community. One thing this does differently, it pulls all of those contributions together and builds scale with those investments, so you can have actual investments that have meaningful opportunity for change in local communities. But Energy Co, it operates on the same model that the Liberals have made their bread and butter, which was asset recycling. It does all the prep work and the network infrastructure investigation and planning and all that sort of stuff. And then that sells that prep work onto a private developer so they can do the rest and own it all. We'd like to see a bit more of a change there. There's a lot of potential for Energy Co to be sort of the makings of a publicly owned renewable company in New South Wales. There's not really an appetite for it yet, but we'd love to see a bit more work on that. And all the network infrastructure within the reses, it's carved out. It doesn't automatically go to Transgrid or any of the privatized network companies. So there's a real opportunity to have the government step in and have publicly owned grid infrastructure again. We're not seeing that yet. They've already done a tender for the Central West Arana res network infrastructure, and that's gone to a private company, not even Transgrid, just a conglomerate of multinationals that have come together to bid for it. So we'd really like to see a lot more. They won the election on the back of promising to end privatization. We want to see it take it one step further and start bringing things back into public hands. Next, we got the federal initiatives. There's a lot in this space. There's billions going out the door to try and enable reaching 82% renewables by 2030. Rewiring the Nation Fund for building out grid infrastructure, capacity investment scheme, enabling private investment in generation and storage. And then you've got the National Reconstruction Fund and Powering Regions Fund that'll go into building up the supply chains that allow people to get locally made inputs that brings the cost down and reduces reliance on international supply chains. But big issue here, a lot of the federal departments, you go and speak to people, they think their job is to just shovel that money out the door, and they think the jobs and community benefits will come just from sending the money out there. We know that's not the case. We've seen so many instances, especially with the CEFC, of them funding these big projects, and then it's all the work's being done by backpackers or exploited migrants. There's no benefit going back into the community. This money's going out to rebuild the country's grid. It should be rebuilding regional economies as well. There's a role for the state government to step in and play a much more active role in managing these investments to make sure that they align with what they're doing at a state level as well. Next, offshore wind. That's a big thing that the federal government's been doing, and it's great so far. They have identified 6 priority areas: Gippsland, the Hunter, Illawarra, Portsea, Bass Strait, and off the coast of Perth. So 2 of those are in New South Wales. Hunter's it's going to be declared later this month. They've already done consultation on it, and we're expecting Illawarra before the end of the year. Hunter, one of the big issues we had was interference from defence. So they cut out a big hole around Newcastle for radar technology and the RAF base at Williamstown. And they also cut it off to the south so that they could do training drills off the Central Coast. So it's an 8 gigawatt zone they're expecting, but there's probably 2 to 4 gigawatts that they cut out just to accommodate defence, which they really didn't need to do. When we get to Illawarra later in the year, Port Kembla has been earmarked to be a base for nuclear submarines. So, shame, absolutely. And ETU has had an anti-nuclear policy since the 1950s. So we stand absolutely in solidarity with you guys in reposition there. Yeah, so you've got a national park to the north and a national park to the south down there. So you've already got very limited space for an offshore wind zone. And now there's a chance that we'll have to have a massive exclusion zone for nuclear submarine base, which there's a good chance that we lose BlueScope down in Port Kembla if that's the case. They've already been saying that the business case is starting to stack up a bit more for them to just go up to, I think it was the Kimberley or off Western Australia, and just make steel for export there. If we put a nuclear submarine base, that'll solidify that business case for them. So we need to have as much offshore wind there so we can power an electric green steel facility in Port Kembla, rebuild those regions. And there's a massive role for the state government in lobbying for much more aggressive action in building that offshore wind. Skill shortages, it's a massive issue. It's one of the reasons why we're not sort of hitting the pace that we'd like to be at the moment. The federal government's invested in 300,000 fee-free TAFE places. There's an Australian skills guarantee, 1 in 10 jobs in government-funded construction needs to be apprentices. We don't think that goes far enough. The sector board plan in New South Wales has 15% minimum and going up to 20% for the stretch goals. And the skills guarantee only applies to construction projects with direct funding. So not things receiving indirect finance or being invested in by government corporations. We need to see that expanded. And the National Skills Guarantee, there was 3.7 billion earmarked in the budget. Still no agreement on it yet, but that'll go into rebuilding capacity in our dying vet sector. The ETU, one of the things we're pushing for out of that is to build a renewable energy training center of excellence in every single state. Because at the moment, if you're an electrical apprentice, there are training modules for you to learn how to do renewables, but there's only one center in the entire country where you can go and learn those training modules. And that's outside Brisbane, built by us in collaboration with industry. So we're trying to get one of those in every state so people can actually learn how to build out renewables. Net Zero Authority, we still don't know exactly what it's going to look like because the budget announcement was just for money to go to the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet to set it up. And we're expecting that to be legislated as an independent authority next year. At the moment, what we're hoping for is that the authority will have the sole focus of delivering a secure transition and economic diversification in coal-reliant regions. So priority for starters is Hunter, Gladstone, Whyalla, Latrobe, and Collie. And we'll have loads of statutory powers to help facilitate that transition. The opportunity for the Minns government there is to play an active role and work with organisations like the Hunter Jobs Alliance to get it built up to the best standard it possibly can. And also to take the design principles of that and apply it to areas that are lower priorities. So like Lithgow and the Illawarra that won't sort of get the first round of attention from a net zero authority. The state government has a chance to step in there. And finally, from the federal government, the efficiency upgrades and electrification money in the last budget, there was $1 billion for the CEFC to offer low-cost finance for households, 300 mil for state and territory governments to upgrade social housing, and money for businesses to electrify as well. We want to see a comprehensive plan for New South Wales to upgrade our social housing stock and electrify it, reduce the instances of energy poverty and people living in public housing, have the solar on our public housing assets and have it owned by the people living in those housing assets. So it comes off their bills and it's not just going into the state government's pockets. We've actually worked a little bit on a plan to do that in remote communities in the Northern Territory. We're hoping to get that up as a pilot. And it'd be great to see a much more active role for New South Wales in getting that going here. And yeah, finally, Minns government's election commitments, bringing back domestic manufacturing and a jobs first commission. That's going to play a massive role because one of the things holding back investment is we've got the IRA in the US, there's an EU plan, China's going gangbusters. They've built an entire East Coast grid worth of solar in the last 3 months. So there's a lot of competition for international inputs and we need to build up our domestic manufacturing here so we can keep it going at the right pace. So the Jobs First Commission will be huge for that. If they stand it up right, it's going to hopefully guide industry towards reaching those targets in the sector board plan so we can increase the speed of the rollout. State-owned Energy Security Corporation. This was a big win, but it has the potential to really not be. It's a $1 billion investment vehicle for reliability investments like community batteries, long-term storage, pumped hydro. Yeah, ownership of these storage assets is going to be the biggest determinant of power prices on a renewable grid and power price stability, because yeah, you don't want that in profit-seeking hands, because when the sun isn't shining or the wind isn't blowing, whoever has ownership of those long-term storage assets is going to determine how stable the prices are and whether people are getting ripped off. So we need those in public hands. And hopefully the Energy Security Corporation is what delivers that. But at the moment, it's looking like it's possibly just an investment company for the government to invest in private projects, sort of like what the CEFC is now. That won't be good enough. That's not going to give us the control we need to sort of make sure it's operating truly in the public interest. And there's already some people in the public service, particularly in Treasury, working to try and pitch it as a new version of an asset recycling scheme for the government, which we can't let happen. And finally, it was mentioned before, the Net Zero Commission. So that's got to develop plans for the entire state to get off emissions intensive stuff. So transport, construction, agriculture, heavy industry. It's going to develop all of those plans that aren't necessarily just energy related and provide advice to government. We want to see that stood up. We want to see it really strong and aggressive and holding government accountable. And hopefully we get just that. But I hope I've summed up all the opportunities ahead of us. And I hope that I've given you guys the tools to be strong critics of this Min's government and hold them to account.
Okay, let's give another round of applause both to Janine and John. Thank you very much. Okay, so now we've got the Q&A component of the event. So we've only got the one microphone. I'm going to ask James, I think, sorry, Stephen, to move it around. And if you get the microphone, please just say your name and keep your whole thing to 2 minutes and finish with a question. If you're making a comment, finish with a question and say who it's to. Okay, so let's go from there. Who's going to be first? Yeah, sorry, Patty.
Thank you very much for your presentation. And I have an observation that a lot of the rapid energy conversions has been more towards electricity, solar, wind, which do require more minerals, especially rare earth, and more waste disposal required. But there has been very little attention given to moving to agricultural alcohol-based fuels, which require very little retooling or reverse retooling of existing combustion engines. But at the same time, they deliver a very tremendous reduction in carbon emissions. Why has there not been a direction towards using such fuels, especially when I went to this more of the northern rivers during the floods? And what I believe what caused the floods was the terribly neglected agricultural sector in the area. Farmers would rather grow grass that arrests carbon than grow crops where they have to borrow from the bank, produce products that are at the mercy of cartels that would reduce their profit margins and endanger their ability to repay the bank. And a lot of it is also due to developments or acquisition of lands for developments, which make, in general, the land around the northern rivers are not able to absorb rainwater the way it used to, but it could have adopted a more logical, strategic agricultural strategy to be able to do so. And even when you go, it isn't just floods; it's also the other extreme, which is the bushfires. Now, that's another issue because bushfires do not happen as much in China and Japan where there are more rails. But what I do observe here is Australia is quite strangely growing highly combustible vegetation near the traps where the sparks and fires usually start. So that's my question. Why haven't we been really taking a serious look at better agricultural strategies, integrating it with rapid conversion into energy, renewable energy. Thank you.
Up to them.
There was a lot of questions here, and I'm not quite sure whether I can answer all of them. But I think, when you're talking about the northern rivers, that's really an important area because they're the ones who experienced the massive floods in Lismore. So that community has been absolutely, shaken to the core, just like we had communities on the south coast with the bushfires. So they understand climate more than anybody else, and they're in a devastated situation with housing prices at the moment. But I think the issue is that the rural community is really an important aspect of transitioning, and that goes to the heart of agriculture, and where you have farmers wanting to do regenerative farming who are really challenging these notions. And yet, and also when you talk about the renewable zones that the New South Wales government put in, they are really regionally focused. So hopefully those communities will be taking on these really important issues. But your question and discussion raised many important issues. And the issue of having a circular economy to deal with the waste of this new technology that's coming in. And the dilemma of where we think we can just not think about consumption because exponentially we just keep consuming. We need to think about that as well. So I'm not sure if I answered all your questions, but they were very interesting, weren't they? So I'll hand it over to James.
Stay sitting down, James. I'll try to get you.
But on the, I guess, mineral stuff, it is an issue that we're sort of moving from one set of rare minerals that we need to mine to keep our society functioning to an even rarer set of minerals that we need to mine to keep our society functioning. It is an issue, and we don't want to end up with this supposedly new economy being still controlled by mining oligopolies. But I don't really know what, like, the pressing nature of the climate change issue is so urgent that I don't think we can afford to take our time and explore technologies that we're not sure about yet. We know what we have now can work and can deliver, so we're just carrying ahead with it. There is some work going into hydrogen. There was $2 billion in the federal budget for that. And they're hoping that that can be used for like shipping fuels, like that as well. And the Net Zero Commission in New South Wales will also be empowered to deal with agricultural issues and land use stuff, like what you're saying. So hopefully we get some response from them out of that. And finally, there was biodiversity credits for something that was going through federal parliament recently, which was sort of like carbon credits with the improving biodiversity and improving the way that the natural environment works. Going to that part of your point, that hopefully should give us the benefits.
Good. Afternoon, Stuart Perkins. Questions in either or both. You're talking about James. You're talking about the thing about making sure that the big capitalists don't take control of it, and it's not all public money being leached out to private people. What are some of the most important things right now that people here or our organisations can do to sort of lobby and make sure that we get a good start as far as keeping some of this stuff in public hands right from the kick-off?
As far as stuff that everyday people can do, joining the union is a big one. Union has been very active in sort of pressing for this start of government to get it right. Right to the minister, because Penny Sharp's the new minister in New South Wales. He's contacted you. She might not contact you back, but someone in your office has to read all those letters and summarize them and get the message to her. So yeah, it's interesting. It's one of those sort of areas because it is the way that energy is. It's not something that sort of consumer activism is able to play a role in to the same level. So I don't know too much about what that everyday person can do on the ground level, other than coming together with people who have a similar view.
Sorry, can I just clarify that slide? I meant to say, like the most important immediate issues.
Oh, yeah. So the most important issue is just getting the investment in new renewables up. I think stopping new coal and gas as well is massive. The fact that one of the first things that this New South Wales government did after the election was say that they'd be approving the Pilliga gas project is disgusting, I think, and it's not the example that a Labor government should be setting. So yeah, I'd say stopping new fossil fuels would be the most pressing thing. Because once you stop the investment into that, it has to go somewhere. That's renewables.
Hi, Stuart. It's great to see you. Look, I'm only picking up on what you said about the leaching of public money. So please forgive me if I'm not answering your question. It's very hard to be a candidate. It's like being a candidate at the election again for me. One of the things that I think is really important is that restoring our public service. And that has been a critical factor. And then we've seen it being played out federally with the consultancy gouging out and the corruption that's happening there. We are going to get a federal corruption commission on the 1st of July, and that's really a big step forward to really oversight this masking of where our public funds go to. And of course, it's all kind of linked again to political funding. And I have to say, as a candidate in the New South Wales election, it was a much more stricter thing. It was a much more fairer playing field because you had to be much more accountable. You had to declare every $1,000 donation you had online, and I had to go and put everything in. Where the federal election, look, they weren't watching what you were doing at all. And so the whole issue of political funding by our powerful lobbyists who are knocking at the door all the time to the major political parties in particular is a real concern. And I cannot believe that, like, Woodside, you know, you've got Ian, who is it? Ian, former Ian McFarlane there. You've got who's the Hunter former member? Fitzgibbon, he's now representing the forestry industry. It's really quite outrageous, and I think it needs to be called out all the time because it is unacceptable. I am sick and tired of politicians leaving their very well paid $200,000 job and then going on and getting more. Why aren't they working for the community? That's what I want to know.
Thanks very much for the speakers, and my name is Jim, and I'm involved in an organisation called Sydney Climate Coalition, and partially in response to the previous question, I would like to urge everyone to get involved in the climate movement in different ways. In fact, I'm giving a plug here, I'll pass this around. Tomorrow is World Environment Day, I don't know if people know that, and we're having a rally, hopefully a big rally, at 12 noon at the Hyde Park Fountain and marching to Parliament House, where we hope to be able to put some pressure on the men's government over these issues. So I'll hand these out later, but please come along tomorrow at 12 o'clock. We're expecting a good. And among the speakers there, we have a speaker from the CFMEU, which is a close ally of the Electrical Trades Union. I would like to give it a huge plug, actually myself, to the ETU, because I think they have played an enormous role. Their policies on renewables are really fantastic, along with some of the other left unions. And in Queensland, they actually pretty much stopped the private, or they didn't stop, but they fought against the privatisation of crucial assets there, and they're doing the same thing in New South Wales. And one of the things that we face is the problem that the blockage to a lot of these programs for renewables is the privatisation of these assets. Ausgrid is a massive problem. We've got to take Ausgrid back. Ausgrid should be nationalised. I put that right up front of the Men's government. They put in the Constitution how that Sydney Water can't be privatised, which is very good. But look, we have got to take some bigger stands here. If we're going to tackle this problem, we've got to take the energy infrastructure back into public hands. Absolutely, we've got to launch a massive campaign in New South Wales and nationally around this issue. I put it right up the top, and as James has pointed out, he said those policies that the ETU and the other unions are putting forward. But look, there's no way we can go through asset recycling and putting money into private companies. They're not going to solve the climate crisis. So yeah, I think I really give credit to the unions that have taken a stand here, but we're going to have to build a massive movement. So please come along tomorrow, and we can start to build the sort of movement that can back up these issues. So what's the question? Please comment.
You want to comment? Yeah. Okay.
Just on, I guess, the fact that the privatisation of things like Ausgrid, Transgrid, Endeavour Energy has had. These companies used to be the biggest training ground for young electrical workers in the country. In New South Wales, I think there were 8 transmission electricians being trained at the start of this year total. Yeah, we need, was it 10 or 100,000 kilometres of new transmission lines to enable 100% renewables on the national grid. So yeah, privatising these assets has been, yeah, they've been corporatised to the point that they're not fulfilling their social function that they're meant to. And the other major problem, which has even affected the publicly owned operators in Queensland, is the AER, the Australian Electrical Regulator, Australian Energy Regulator. They're terrible. It's sort of facilitated by the federal government, and they go in and they set operations budget for each of these energy companies, and they basically set the price ceiling so low that they're not able to do the work they need to do to keep the grid where it has to be. So there's 100% we need more public ownership, and yeah, we've been massively pushing the Men's government for that, but there's lots of other stuff that needs fixing as well. And yeah, I'd love to see more of it from the state and federal government.
Thank you, Jim, for that question and for discussion. And I think really at the heart of what you're saying is that this is the time where we all have to be activists. It's no longer an option to sit and watch. We all have to get involved and do what we can. And I guess that's really my commending to the young people who are stepping up with their climate strike. Tomorrow, World Environment Day, is a really important day, and because we know that environmental collapse, biodiversity collapse means human collapse. We're living in really hard times. Now, the previous New South Wales coalition government changed the biodiversity laws. They changed them when every evidence-based scientist said, don't change them, because if you change them, you will open the can of mass land clearing. And that has what has happened. So we now need the Minns government, and hopefully with Penny Sharp, who has been very supportive, to really get our environment laws, New South Wales environment laws, fit for purpose, because they are not fit for purpose at the moment. Our forestry laws, which have the business model of turning New South Wales forestry into a corporation that runs at a loss, that's basically going into koala habitat and removing their feed trees, is a total disaster. That has to stop. So really, again, we are in a war against nature, and we need new mindsets for it. Penny Sharp, when I read the article, she talked about restoring nature, and that is really critical that we have to do. Last night, I don't know if you saw the television, there was a little show about a baby chimp being born in and it was in an English zoo, and it was so cute, the little chimp and its mother, and there's only 5,000 of that very rare species left. But the issue is, being born in a zoo, you look at it from human-centered lens, but, oh, isn't that cute? We feel really sorry for it. But meanwhile, we're destroying their habitat at rapacious rates. And this really has to stop. So that's my view.
Yeah, my name's John. I would just like to ask a question in relation to recent federal government, Albanese government actions, and possibility of the policy behind those actions being replicated in New South Wales. In that, last month in May, Tanganyika approved a new coal mine in the Isaac River in Queensland, which produced an outcry for environmentalists. And I guess I'm partly thinking that although the government, the Albanese government, has done positive things, they've also done things which environmentalists describe as a complete opposite. And would you think there's a possibility of that going on in New South Wales as well, with two Labor governments operating in tandem and possibly replicating each other in terms of what they're going to do? Stephen, what does the
I think that's totally right. I think it's disgraceful what is happening now. Tanya Plibersek has approved that. She has said she's going to put a climate trigger in the new Federal Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Act, or the EPBC Act. That is really important because there is no climate trigger in. Labor is saying that they are reducing, putting in renewables. But the other side of it is they're opening up and expanding greenhouse gas emissions. This is really the debate that we are facing. This is the absolutely critical debate about not opening any more coal and gas. The International Energy Agency, the IPCC, has told us, no, we can't do it. Our South Pacific neighbours are telling us, no, you can't do it. The Albanese government wants to have the climate conference in 2026, I think co-hosted with the Pacific Islanders. But they have to start standing up and definitely say no. And I think that's where we have to keep calling them into account, because it's unacceptable.
I think it's absolutely a massive risk of both state and federal governments continuing to do stuff like that. I think it's where these sort of grassroots movements like the Sydney Climate Coalition, groups like trade unions have the opportunity to play a massive role in pressuring them, not letting them get away with it. I think the other important thing is making sure that we're targeting campaigns for legislation that doesn't let them get away with it. So things like the EPBC reform, you get that done, and it doesn't matter how much of a prick the minister is, they've got a hard barrier. It's the same thing with the electricity roadmap in New South Wales. The best thing that did was take it out of the hands of the politicians so that things can get underway. Yeah, definitely targeting our activism and things that take it out of the hands of the politicians.
My name is Fabio. I'm really interested on knowing what's happening with the Labour Party, because the signs that we're getting, apart from the fact that they're opening mine and gas extraction, is that they're passing incredible laws against protesters, and they're treating protesters as terrorists, and that is really wrong. I think you know, I don't belong to any party because I really don't believe it. And unfortunately, the Labour Party, it seems to be showing again that they producing laws that allows then the Liberal, when they come in, to reinforce them and do it even worse. So it's a game that goes left, right, but there is no left, right. There is right. And that's what it is. Thank you.
Yeah, the protest laws in New South Wales were mistakes, and the fact that the New South Wales Labor didn't have to support them, we were in opposition. We could have very easily just said we're not supporting this, and they would have gone through anyway, but we would have been able to maintain some semblance of moral high ground. Instead, we had left members of the Shadow Cabinet getting up in Parliament and saying climate protesters are annoying, we should be locked up. So yeah, they built in a mechanism for them to be reviewed, and hopefully they get completely taken out. But yeah, it is a worrying streak. We've also seen South Australia with their anti-protest laws that were seemingly worked out on talkback radio. Yeah, so I don't know what the response is institutionally. As a Labor Party member, there's definitely a lot of work that needs doing on democratising the internal party structures, so we don't end up with MPs going rogue and doing things like signing up for August stage 3 tax cuts and these anti-protest laws. So the internal democracy of these parties has a big role to play, and hopefully that can be strengthened and expanded. But yeah, it's just holding them to account, because it's not something anyone likes to see.
If New South Wales Labor is really legitimate and genuine about taking climate action, then it needs to repeal the protest law.
Okay, what's next? Wait a minute.
My name's Nick. It's pretty much an extension of continuation of some of the issues raised tonight. We started off with renewable energy, transition to more of an electrical-based economy, even though I don't think it's actually viable to be completely 100% based on electricity, because it's actually a high watt energy, not a low or medium water energy. First thing is, most of the companies that you're dealing with are now privatized, predominantly foreign-based. What is the incentive when they're, even in the US, from the 1970s onwards, businesses have gone from focusing on stakeholders to focusing on shareholders. And if you don't have shares in a particular organization, your voice and your power and your influence is virtually pretty much null. Now, as governments, we do have the power to challenge companies, but in terms of the new government, for example, even though they're a lot better than what we've had last decade, having laws, having policies such as not challenging not stopping the stage 3 tax cuts, not focusing, allowing a lot of money to go to the big corporations, but not focusing on say the communities. Even though we're talking about what is happening from the bottom up, when we're seeing actions or the illusion, the projection from the top down that we're actually giving a lot of concessions to the top and yet very little challenge or accountability for what they have. What chance do we have to focus on renewable energy, climate change, or social issues, for example, public housing, or a more united community rather than focusing purely on the economy? How can we change this sort of behaviour? Because one, we're running out of time in terms of we're moving now to new phases of as temperatures approaching 1.5 degrees and above. But now we can't handle things at this point in time globally. What chance do we have when you get to 2.5, 3 degrees, 4 degrees on average? Which 4 degrees doesn't sound like a lot to many people, but at this point in time, we've got a 10 degrees increase in the poles, predominantly North Pole. We've gone from 4 million square kilometres of ice, for example, reducing to over just between 2.5 million square kilometres. Just an example, our climate is starting to accelerate in terms of behaviour that's out of our control, and yet we're bickering over small things. And in the scheme of things, we're small fish in a very large pond. But ironically, though, if people are united, though, that small fish can actually really piss off some of the big fish for change that actually can go into the cause that really matters. Now, even though we're talking about renewables, socially, economically, even in the business world, education-wise, we've hollowed out many things of actually empowering people. What can you guys offer or influence certain people, or even name people, so we know both the good and the bad in terms of who have confidence to support and who should be focusing on getting away from supporting them and say they should be marginalised or laughed at in public. Because a lot of even the big corporations, they're really run scared when they're exposed out in the public, where they cannot hide. Someone is the best bleach, and yet most of us are still talking in the shadows and not focusing on the light and where the colours are.
Thanks.
Can you give us some suggestions on what I've just raised? Thank you.
The issue of corporations is a really, really deep and dark part of the climate wars, because they have held us to account for over 20 years. Climate change action is not new. People have been working on it for a long time, and yet we didn't get the critical mass to change it. We are in the critical mass now, but that's a big step forward. And I guess that gives us hope that we have broken through. And where solar is now the cheapest, we hope the money will follow the solar and the cheap and the renewable. And that will be the hook to really finally, get that corporation money away from the fossil into the renewable. But again, it's always a bit of a risk, because as we talked about, it has to be, wealth distribution is now getting absolute to obscene levels globally and in Australia. And until we get that inequality back, which is breaking the corporations, and that's not something they want to do, they're fighting all the way. But we are on the ascendancy. It's not the best, but we're doing better. So we just have to keep at it.
If I understood the question right, it's sort of concerned that we're moving from one privatized, corporatized model to another privatized, corporatized model. Yeah, the time to address that really would have been 15, 20 years ago. It's at the point now with the climate crisis where leaders, even ones who might feel that we shouldn't be involved in corporations in this, sort of have to face the reality that it's the system we've got and the priorities keeping life sustainable on this planet. Yeah, I don't really have, I guess, a response. Just that, yeah, I would have much preferred to see this go out completely publicly owned. The entire pitch of renewables in Australia is that we get so much on there that power is essentially free, and it makes our manufacturing competitive with the rest of the world again. What happens to all these privately owned renewable generation sites when power is essentially free and they're not profitable anymore? No one can give me an answer on that. Yeah, so I don't really know what the solution is unless we're saying we'll hit that critical mass point eventually and just nationalize the lot. I'd be here for it. But yeah, I don't quite have a specific answer for it. So
My name's Michelle. I'm not meaning to be facetious at all, but I think about those people like Kenneth Brooks. That's really entered into the energy space, and I think it fits quite well with the previous question. I mean, his push and shove around AGL really shook up the board, and they had to actually change direction in AGL. He's talking about being greener now. So in terms of what has been talked about, you know, there is that change. You know, we don't have the time where a previous prime minister stood in the house with a chunk of coal and said that, you know, what's this to be afraid of? There is that momentum that's going on, but I'm really intrigued by people like Cannon Brooks. That's really in this energy space, putting private money, maybe, into the game. So I'm really interested in that emergence and what your comments might be around those players now.
Thanks, Bishop.
Yeah, hi, Michelle. Now, isn't Simon Cannon Brooks, isn't he the one who's now talked with Twiggy and he's bought the new Northern Territory battery because he believes the investment is with the superpower, because that's the, that Australia has the potential to be an energy superpower, and by transmitting the all the solar in Northern Territory up to Singapore. So that goes on to the Ross Garner vision, because we haven't really talked about that, where the economics are saying that Australia will be a super energy renewable power. So I guess that is a very legitimate thing. As well, you have people like Simon Holmes the Court. Now, Simon Holmes the Court, philanthropist, but he's the one who's driven the teal independence, and I wasn't a teal independent. But he's driven that, and that was really significant because it really did change. That federal election really became the issue of climate. And so that, again, a positive reinforcement of what you're really saying.
yeah, I'm not gonna speak negatively of billionaires and massive corporations getting involved in this, because as I said before, the challenge is such that any extra dollar is a much needed extra dollar in building this out. But I guess I do have reservations about the idea of he's obviously investing because it is a profitable space. What role is this transition going to have in making inequality in this country worse if all the opportunities are going to people who already have so much to build it out? So I do have worries about that. And hopefully through other things like changing the tax system and things like that, we can sort of redistribute it. But yeah, definitely happy that it's interested in investing so much.
Anybody else? Maybe just as a close, I'm not into conspiracies either, but I do believe in oligopolies. And the energy sector, whether we like it or not, is undeniable. It is an oligopoly. Few players dominating a market that everyone uses and extracts resources that nature provided for free. So if you tax them, they simply pass on the tax to the consumer. If you give them subsidies, they just simply declare it as extra income. So those two ways are not the way to go. I would prefer rather to see the democratization of the ownership of these oligopolies. I don't believe in competition policy because markets, because of intense competition, always tends back to cartels, to oligopolies. And the only way to correct it is to get labor to own a part of it, the workers, the communities to own part of it, and even government to own part of it, so that they can balance the concern of investors in getting a have good enough return, but at the same time manage their expectations as consumers to be able to afford electricity for dignified human existence, and workers, laborers, to manage their concerns about a just compensation. So that's my comment, and I'd like your response to it. Thank you.
I'll cover up I'm not wearing my ETV hat for this particular comment. I 100% agree. At Australian Young Labour Conference earlier this year, the left moved a motion to try and compel the federal government to embrace inclusive ownership funds, which is the government supporting workers to take an ownership of the companies that they work for and get a say on the board, things like that. I think it's a really important initiative. It's something that needs to be investigated more. And it's a great way of redistributing wealth back to the workers, giving them a say in how things are done, instead of not sort of alienated so much from the day-to-day work. And I'd love to see more of it. I'm not sure that it's something that gets talked about too much in the halls of government. So definitely, just would love to see it become a conversation that does get put on the table.
And I'm not quite sure in my memory of what you were saying, but one of the things I'd like to finish saying is that what we're dealing with are powerful, extraordinarily powerful forces that are working against really fundamental climate action. And I guess you go back and you look at the tobacco industry and the lies, the misinformation. And we're now living in an incredibly dangerous era with social media, AI coming on board rapidly, that democracy and legitimate progressive views are so under attack. And that's why we have to be vigilant. We have no choice, because we have to keep fighting back.
Okay, thank you very much, James and Janine. Please, one more round of applause. Thanks to everybody who asked the question. I just got to announce the next session. I've got to go. So I don't know if I should be on camera for this. Our next Politics in the Pub is on July 2, Sunday, 4 p.m. and the topic is Powder Kegs of Global Power Conflict, Ukraine and Taiwan. And the speakers are Joffrey, who's spoken a couple of times this evening, and John Hallam to the anti-nuclear campaigner that several of you would know. So I urge you to try to follow the Politics in the Pub Facebook group, join it. That gets you notifications. And the video from tonight is already going to be posted on the politicsinthepub.org.au website. So we've got a couple of announcements as well. First of all, the one that Jim mentioned, the No New Coal and Gas action is on tomorrow at noon at the Archibald Fountain. And I'd just like to say to it, I don't see the PSA logo on the bottom of the Sydney Climate Coalition. So there's an action. Okay, but it's a very impressive coalition, and I really hope it's an effective event. The other one I want to announce is on Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. at the New South Wales Teachers Federation. There's the launch of a new video called Come Walk With Us. It features a Maritime Union delegate to talk about why the yes in the referendum is important for her and her community and her union. So come along to that if you can. So that's it, I think. Thanks very much, everybody. You good there? You're welcome.